Today, we're going to talk about making a career of your photography with my good friends Dan Hawk and Rick LePage. Well, hey everybody, welcome to This Approach in the Scene. I really have the pleasure today of having Dan Hawk and Rick LePage sitting here with me. And this is in response to a lot of comments in the YouTube channel and emails that I've gotten with people wanting to know more about, building a bridge between your current career and your passion for photography, to find a way to make photography pay and become the career that you really want. And while I think it's more difficult today than it has been in the past, it's not impossible, particularly if you have enough passion and if you really hone your skills to the point where you're ready for it before you take that dive. And so I want to have a discussion today with Rick and Dan, and I'll just open it up. Rick's going to kind of moderate a little bit. Rick is an amazing individual who runs workshops with me, and I think every workshop he comes on, everyone feels a huge enrichment in that we have a kind of a cool yin and yang when we teach workshops together. Rick's a really soulful, thoughtful student of all things photographic, and while you haven't worked actually as a professional photographer, you've made a career around photography and in publishing about photography and in knowing everything about photography in the software industry and the printing industry, and you know a lot about photography, and you're a darn good photographer. And I'm going to throw up right now some images just from our Moab workshop, actually, because there was some of Rick's images in Moab. You were feeling it and did some just beautiful, beautiful work. And Dan, you, like I, have had a more professional career track and then turned it into a digital photography career that's successful in a different realm. I've more become kind of a landscape travel photo educator, and you are doing commercial work, and you've gotten in with companies, and you're doing headshots and products and marketing plans for companies, and you've moved from banking into that, and some of your imagery is just really, really awesome, both the commercial work that you're doing and the landscape stuff that you have a passion for. And so I think we'll just start it off with that.
Yeah, great.
Hi, I'm Rick LePage. I run CompleteDigitalPhotography.com, and I'm an old friend of Hudson's and a relatively new friend of Dan's. I am a photographer, although I'm not a professional. I've worked in the market, in the industry, since the late 1980s. Mostly as a journalist, a writer, and an editor. And Hudson and I have had some conversations about what it's like to be a professional photographer in this day and age. When I was coming up and film was still strong, there was a pretty straightforward path to becoming a professional photographer. Maybe you went to school, but if you were interested in photography, you got an apprenticeship or an assistantship with someone in any field: commercial work, portrait, wedding,
Which you were interested in.
Yeah. And even landscape and fine art. There was a path to becoming a professional photographer. Today it's not so easy. With the death of film and the rise of digital, the web and social media have kind of transformed.
Microstock.
Yes, all of this stuff. And so to transform photography, once again, photography is one of those things that over time, you get these pivot points where things change. The unfortunate side of this is that it kind of leveled the pro market in the early 2000s. Photos are everywhere. Mostly they're on small screens and on web pages, and we've got this thing that I don't think is a bad thing, but everyone feels like a photographer. One of the places that we're not really going to talk about today, but the wedding photography market is a perfect example of this. The number of people I know who wanted to become wedding photographers but go into the market and people don't want to spend money on their wedding photography. That there's still good high-end wedding photography out there, but that's changed. So with this anyone being a photographer thing, it's harder, I think, in a lot of ways for a professional to make a reasonable living as a photographer. I've known Hudson a long time. As I said, I've known Dan a little bit shorter time. But one of the things that's impressed me with both of them is the way that they've been able to carve out a niche not so much a niche, but carve out a successful place as a photographer. Dan, you're primarily a commercial photographer. Right. Hudson, you started out doing some commercial and editorial work, but you've kind of evolved into a commercial or to travel and landscape photographer focusing on photo education.
Yep.
You know, you and I help you out on some of your workshops, and you know, the whole focus is on how to become a better photographer.
Yep.
So I thought that today it would be nice to just sort of have a conversation about how you guys got there and where you see things going in the next few years. Right. Neither of you were trained as photographers. No. Both of you had other careers and lives, but something struck you each about photography, you know. And so I'd start off by saying, you know, what was it that made you want to become a professional photographer?
Yeah,
Dan, why don't you
I guess I'll
take
start.
it up?
Yeah, I think. Well, first of all, the best premise is to say that I used to be a banker, right? I actually worked in wealth management banking, and in underwriting and lending and just kind of all the stuff that happens for, you know, kind of wealthy, affluent individuals. And that it started off as being a branch manager and that sort of thing. But I came through that world, which is, you know, kind of more of a corporate world where you're dealing with both small business owners and just kind of the average everyday person that comes in. And the market and the industry on the banking side changed a lot. And while it was changing, I happened to also be, I was bike commuting, and I started taking pictures with my iPhone during my bike commute. And if you know anything about Portland, Oregon, there's certain times of the year where the commute is it's dark on both ends.
That's true.
And so what happened was I was getting these gorgeous sunrises and sunsets and blue hour and golden hour. And the more I did it, the more I felt like maybe I needed a real camera. And I had kind of grown up shooting on film, taking pictures of, you know, landscape and snapshots, but mostly on film. And when I bought a new camera, and pretty much that was it. I was sucked in. Yeah. And I was already a pretty avid hiker and was out with my kids and friends hiking and doing some backpacking. And so when I got that new camera, it went in my bike bag every day. It went out on every hike. I started taking pictures. People started receiving those well, and I had people ask, "Hey, can you make me a calendar? Can you do like a calendar and that sort of thing?" So I jumped in on that, and then the banking industry changed a bunch. Yeah. And this was about end of 2015, beginning of 16, and I had already been shooting an awful lot, but my boss came to me and said, "Hey, we're making some big changes. We're bumping all of your goals up, way up, 30% up, and we want you to work with a smaller group of clients." And I literally came home to my wife and I said, "This sounds terrible. Can I quit?" And we had luckily had a great year. And she said, "Well, okay, we have enough in savings, but can you not burn through the savings? And by the way, what are you going to do?" Yeah. I said, "Well, I'm not totally sure, but I've got some ideas." And to make the long story short, I taught myself how to shoot headshots. I bought a lightweight lighting kit. It was the David Hobby Strobist kit. From I can't remember what they're called, Midwestern Photo Exchange. And I bought the kit. I called up a bunch of buddies and said, "Come over to my house. I got to work out how to do this." Borrowed a roll of seamless and a stand from a friend who's a wedding photographer, and that's kind of how I got rolling. I got my first couple of big jobs basically doing that, and the first few clients that I worked with were actually people I worked with as a banker. So they were wealthy small business owners, people who had, you know, kind of smaller business, 10, 20 employees, and I did headshots for them. And the reason I chose the commercial side of things, which is essentially business to business, is because I've seen, as an underwriter and a banker, I've seen lots and lots of tax returns and marketing plans and business plans. So I kind of have an understanding of where the money is.
Yeah.
And I made a conscious decision to not go after the personal photo budgets for people taking pictures of babies, families, because there you're tapped
Graduation
into,
photos.
yeah, you're tapped
That's-
into a certain
yeah.
kind of saving. It's
Right.
the personal savings.
Yeah.
Yep.
Whereas a business, that's a marketing expense.
They've got a budget.
So that's kind of how I landed on that side
Okay.
of things.
So we'll get back to that.
Yeah.
Hudson, you've come from the other side. You weren't a banker. You were a lawyer.
I was a lawyer, believe it or not. That underneath that lawyer was always lurking this adventure travel photographer. I think I grew up in a family that traveled a ton, and as a little kid, cousins and uncles would be coming back from mountaineering trips in Asia or travels in Africa with slideshows, and the family would get together and we'd have these old slideshows of Kodachrome slides, and it seemed like the natural thing to do. As I grew up on a small farm here in Oregon, and there wasn't a whole bunch of money, but I joined the military. I was in the Navy in the Gulf War, and I saved my money, and the first thing that I bought before I even really had a car was it was a Minolta Maxim 7XI. I think that one of the autofocusing I had eye detect. Before
Minolta used to make cameras.
Minolta used to make cameras. But, I started looking in photo books of people whose images I really admired. I think Galen Rowell and Art Wolfe were big inspirations for me because I've always been into the mountains and hiking and travel and adventure. And so, it was natural for me to make slideshows for my 90-year-old grandmother to see these places that I'd been, and so I would bring sort of family and friends along on adventures that I had, and that's kind of what I thought of photography. I didn't think of it as so much of a career, and I wound up, funneling along, going through, community college after the military, through the University of Oregon, studying earth sciences to studying environmental law at Berkeley, and then somehow a litigator in a big firm here in Portland, and not super happy. And I'm sitting at my desk and doing all this, legal memos and, court motions and looking out the window at the world I'd rather be out in. And I was focusing a lot of my time on photography. And it was about the same time that, digital was just, I remember I had this little video camera that had a 1 megapixel digital still capture. And I'm like, wow, this is crazy. And I bought really good film scanners, and I started shooting medium format film and a little 4x5 film and scanning and working in the early versions of Photoshop and color correcting and all this. And then the digital age came about, and I made the leap. And about the same time that my dissatisfaction with law just became intense. And into my sphere came some pretty amazing photographers. I met up with John Eastcott and Eva Momatuk. I was up in Washington and just kind of was in the same house of this climber, Andre, who's a famous mountain climber from the days of the Eiger, and the hemp rope, and he was good friends with Eva because they both had come from Poland originally, escaped from the Iron Curtain, and I just ran into them and made friends with them, and they're these National Geographic photographers, and they taught me a lot, and I went on trips with them, and they were good mentors, and I got into Art Wolfe's orbit a little bit and learned a lot from him, and just slowly things evolved. I would say that becoming a professional photographer making money from the business was a long and treacherous bridge from the law. Luckily I had some money saved. I was not a flagrant spending lawyer. I wasn't driving the Beamer. I was driving the old beater Honda, and I had savings, and I think it took about 6 or 7 years before I was really turning a profit. I was doing magazine and newspaper articles, selling stock, which the money that you got from stock was. I entered stock at the wrong moment. And
the stock photography market used to be a relatively good one for photographers, and at the beginning of the digital era, it was still quite good, but the bottom really did drop out.
And my love is really adventure travel and visual storytelling. Mm-hmm. And I think that in yesteryear, with the thriving print market and magazines hungry for that stuff, and the complexity of getting good images in the days of film, you could really establish yourself and you could do well at that, and at the same time be selling stock on the side. And I think that channel of becoming successful has become extremely narrow.
Yeah.
You have to know the right people, and you have to be doing something extraordinary, like my friend Josh Heidman going deep into caves, and doing incredible lighting work in caverns 800 feet under the ground. I think that the one thing that's happened, I have a lot of friends who are disillusioned photographers from the age when the print cycle was so much better and you could do that kind of travel photography like I love. And they feel like, the modern age has kind of crushed that and the death of the print industry.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that one thing that I've always had, when in the military, one of my favorite things I did was establish a training program to really accelerate advancement of people that I was working with. Once I got a position of authority, I started training so that people would pass the Navy-wide exam that I worked with instead of failing it over and over and over again. And in the law firm, I loved working with new associates that were coming in, and I just kind of always liked training, and I like people, and I like working with people. So the fact that digital photography has opened this world of photography to people who love it and allowed them to learn faster because they get instant feedback on the back of their camera. Right. And the fact that you said everybody feels like they're a photographer, some of the things that closed doors to traditional careers in photography have kind of opened doors to someone like me that loves photography, and I love sharing my love of photography with people. So
your trip to where you are today was a little bit more winding. It sounds like Dan's was a little bit more straightforward.
Yeah.
So those first couple of years, the first year was pretty good for you.
Yeah.
How in the 4 or 5 years since you started, how hard has it been to sort of keep clients, get clients, to keep things interesting?
Well, I think the first thing is I'll give you anybody who wants the advice. If you're leaving, it's good to make sure you have either somebody who has health insurance.
Yeah.
And maybe some savings.
Yeah.
And it's also not a bad idea to have somebody who understands all the insurance and that sort of world. I got really lucky because I left on a real positive note. I actually got to leave notice and let all my clients know I was leaving, which really set me up to leave on good terms, and it also helped me to be able to work with some of those clients. I also got all my bonuses from the year before. I also worked out, there was kind of a really cool plan. The state of Oregon has a thing where if you're starting a small business, you can actually submit a business plan and do this small business owners thing where you get your unemployment benefits, but you don't have to look for a job. You just have to try to ramp up the thing you're doing.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. Yep. So I had that happen. I took a bunch of small random jobs that first year doing some consulting work for a friend who has a software company. I'm not a software guy, but I know relationship management, and so he hired me to manage a pretty big national website development campaign, which was great. It was with Johnson & Johnson.
So it sounds like that first year was
lots of
easy. Relatively speaking.
It was really weird to not be going to an office, but I was also sitting at the kitchen table. I didn't have a home office. Yeah. I was sitting at my computer. I was clocking in while I was billable hours, doing kind of random stuff. And I got my first couple big, headshot and small business branding gigs that year, which was great. But that ended after that first year. No more bonuses, no more of that stuff. And the next year, it was all photography.
Yep.
And I think what I've found is that from that first moment on, almost every single client that I've picked up has been because I know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody.
Yeah.
And if I pick the client I'm working with, this month, there's a pretty good chance that person is, 7 steps removed from somebody I worked with 3 years ago. I think I was working out that I ran Facebook ads a couple of years ago, and of all the money I spent on that and all the things I've done, of all the ads I've ever run, I've only picked up one client that has ever identified that's how she found me.
Well, and I think
that's an interesting
an indicator of how different things are today from, I mean, 30 years ago, there were literally books. Like when I was a magazine editor, there were books that had lists of photographers and designers and,
Yep.
you know, with work that I could see, and I could call up and say, hey, your work looks good. I'd love to see a portfolio.
Yep.
Well,
you know.
they do still have some things like that. So I'm a member of ASMP, the American
Yep.
Society of Media Photographers, and we have a website called Find a Photographer, and it's still friends of mine get really well-paying jobs from that still.
Yeah.
And there are still photographers out there that are showing their books to publications and to branding agencies and that sort of marketing
Yeah.
agencies. But that's a certain level of work.
Right. Right.
The things that you're doing at a local level, like if you're going to work with a local travel board, or you're going to work with a local restaurant or a clothing brand or something like that, they're not typically looking there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They're going from somebody who knows somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Well.
in terms of keeping business, for me, it's you keep the people happy.
Right.
You deliver something of really high value, and then you continue to be in touch with them so that the next time they need something, or the time somebody asks about it, they go, oh yeah, Dan's a really great guy. He's really easy. This is the biggest one. He's really nice to work with.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know that my imagery is, I like it,
Mhm.
and I think my clients like it, that I hear from them, they like it. But the real big thing is not so much that my imagery is leaps and bounds better than somebody else's. It's that I'm easier to work with. I think that I've heard that lots of times.
We should show a couple of your
Sure.
your
Oh, for
pieces,
sure.
too.
We'll show some images.
Yeah.
I think one thing that's important for those of you who are, thinking about making the leap into making photography a business, and another thing to really think about is having more than one revenue generating stream. When I was making that leap myself, I took a workshop in Maine from Bob Christ, who's an awesome National Geographic photographer who wrote a column in outdoor photography for years and years, and he's just a great educator. And his advice at the time, it was some years ago, was sort of like, well, kid, you got the stuff, you got a great eye. It's not easy today. It's changing,
Right.
and you've got to have lots of different pathways. He was saying, there's potential for stock photography, although that's fading. There's print sales. There's working with publications and doing travel stories, which is kind of fading. There's education. There's all these different realms. Working with companies, and so I think it comes to me from what Dan was just talking about, relationships. One of the biggest things for me has been working with companies that I admire. So I like using ARM1 software. I made friends with the people at ARM1, and I wound up doing a whole lot of training for their software and testing and working with them. Hoya filters is another example, and I'm not making money directly from some of my sponsors, like Hoya filters or like Luma straps, Luma Labs, which Dan is involved with, or Kirk Enterprise Solutions, but they also help broadcast what I do as a photo educator through their social media channels, and they make my network wider. There's all these kinds of things you have to think about. Maybe you're not going to do just one thing, and it may not even be the thing that drew you to photography in the first place. For me, I'm not out in the mountains all the time having great adventures and bringing them home to share with my family. That's what got me into photography. But what I live for these days is the workshops. Being out there with Rick and a group of people in some spectacular place and sharing that excitement about capturing what's happening and having an adventure out there together.
Right.
And you've sort of developed an arrangement with Luma.
Yeah. I think it.
Well, we all know from way back when.
Yeah. Well, and it's been fun. You've been talking about our what we do.
My favorite strap ever. This QD connector just makes the whole thing, and the swivel is just phenomenal.
So I think in the same way, I have found that there's a lot of different things you can do.
Mm-hmm.
You can, sometimes you work with, regular clients, sometimes you work with brands. I was a customer of Luma Labs, and
Yes, we all
I can't even remember which strap it was, but at some point I ordered a strap, and Greg, who is the guy who does all the machining and all the designing,
The mad scientist.
The mad scientist, yeah. It's always really noisy there. Lots of loud machining, and it's fun. But one of the things that I reached out, I ordered one. He's like, "Hey, I'm here in Portland. Let's save the $5 in shipping, and we'll get together and have a cup of coffee, and I'll deliver it to you." And that,
Which is great.
with the long story, is that basically I became kind of lead beta tester, and started working on doing product photography and some different things that the other co-founder Duncan had been doing, but he went on to bigger, better.
Duncan's a friend of ours.
Yes.
He went on to do some pretty amazing stuff over in Germany.
Yes.
And so I took over a lot of things he had been doing, and it has basically turned into a really interesting place where I'm able to really impact the design of what we do. It's kind of interesting to be able to look at these products and know, like, yeah, this was my idea. I beat the crap out of this stuff.
Yeah.
And we treat it probably not as much as you do. Your stuff is
An adventure photographer does that.
it gets a lot of use. But what I picked up there is this is I'm a part owner. I'm involved in all the marketing and the what's the right word for it? Just getting this out, getting it out there, getting it out there, dealing with clients, working with our ambassadors, people like you, Hudson.
It also gives you an avenue for your landscape photography because
Yeah.
you see a lot more
It
of that.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah, and speaking about talking about diversifying. So for me, this is one of those months where I'm doing a few metal prints for somebody for his office. He's actually an investment bank, investment guy, and I'm doing some big metal prints. 40-inch, 30, 40-inch prints, and that's an income source.
Yep.
I don't normally sell a lot of prints, but I pick up a few of those every year.
Yeah.
I of course have some small income from
Luma.
Luma as we're growing the company. Sometimes it's headshots, sometimes it's commercial branding work. I'll go into an office and take pictures of people doing their thing, working, and sometimes it's products. So it's really broad. There's lots of different stuff, but that's it's interesting that Luma kind of became. I was kind of, hey, this is something I enjoy working with, and then to be able to now be involved with the company is pretty amazing, and it's a fun little. I'm a gearhead. I mean, I'm like, and looking around Hudson's studio here, I mean, he's the same.
Yeah, oh yeah. I think we're all geared.
I think you've been accumulating it longer than I have.
Oh yeah, the land of back behind here. There's lots more stuff.
But yeah, so for me, that's kind of where that has all come in. Is it's diversifying where this all comes from, knowing that it will change. And whether it's because the social media algorithms have changed, or client tastes have changed, or people are buying imagery from different places. Whatever changes, if you're diversifying things, it helps you to weather those storms, weather those changes.
All right. Well, I think that we're probably getting pretty close on time here. This has been a really cool discussion. And once again, this is something that a lot of you who are watching Approaching the Scene have asked, talk about how you succeed as a professional photographer and turn this into a career. And so I hope you've enjoyed the chat that we've had. I think it's been a lot of fun. I've definitely learned a lot about where Dan has come from with his photography, because he's really doing a great job here. And he's a fun guy to hang out with, and so is Rick. So I've enjoyed having both you guys. Thanks so much. And thanks to everybody for it's been fun. So thanks to everybody for submitting questions, subscribing, liking, sharing the channel with your friends. This whole thing is about the community and community involvement. So keep sending me those questions. You can hit me via email. You can hit me in the YouTube comments. I'm easy to get. All right, thanks. We'll see you next week.